Sometimes a single choice made out of kindness can change two lives forever. On a dusty Kansas train platform in 1895, a young woman agreed to help her ailing cousin, never knowing she was about to step into someone else's destiny. Clara Wells wasn't supposed to be there that day. When ranch foreman Thomas Clay arrived to collect a wealthy bride-to-be, he mistook Clara for the heiress. Heartbroken and weary of pretense, Clara stayed silent, curious to see what it felt like to be chosen. As they journeyed across the prairie together, Thomas began seeing through the facade, yet found himself drawn to the real woman beneath. Could a love born from a lie become the truest thing they'd known? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning had begun, like any other Tuesday in Millbrook, Kansas. Clara Wells stood before her classroom of 12 students, chalk dust settling on the cuffs of her dark blue dress as she wrote the day's grammar lesson on the blackboard. Sunlight slanted through the schoolhouse windows, catching particles of dust that danced in the air like tiny stars. She had taught here for 4 years now, ever since finishing normal school in Topeka. And she loved it, the questions in young eyes, the satisfaction of watching understanding dawn on a child's face, the quiet dignity of useful work. But today, her mind kept drifting. She glanced at the small clock on her desk, 2:30. In 3 hours, she was supposed to meet her cousin Josephine at the train station. Or rather, she was supposed to watch Josephine board the westbound train that would carry her to a new life at the Broken Arrow Ranch, where she would marry a man she had never met. Clara had always found the arrangement peculiar. Josephine was the daughter of Clara's uncle Frederick, a successful grain merchant who had made his fortune supplying the railroads. Josephine had grown up in Kansas City with every advantage: fine dresses, piano lessons, trips to Chicago. She was beautiful in that polished way that money could buy, with golden hair always perfectly arranged and skin that had never known a day of honest labor. The marriage had been arranged through correspondence. Mr. Harrison, the owner of the Broken Arrow, was looking for a suitable wife for his grandson Robert. Frederick Wells, always eager to expand his business connections, had offered his daughter. Letters had been exchanged. Photographs had been sent. An agreement had been reached. Josephine would travel to the ranch, meet Robert, and if both parties were agreeable, though this seemed more formality than genuine question, they would marry within the month. Clara had seen Josephine only twice since the arrangement was made. Her cousin had seemed resigned more than excited, though she spoke little of her feelings. There was something in her eyes, though, something Clara recognized. The look of a person going through motions, expected of them, not chosen by them. The school bell rang, releasing the children into the warm September afternoon. Clara tidied her desk, locked the schoolhouse door, and walked the 3 blocks to her boarding house. Mrs. Hennessy's establishment was respectable if modest, a 2-story wooden structure with peeling paint and a front porch that sagged slightly on one side. Clara's room was on the 2nd floor, small but hers. A narrow bed, a dresser with a cracked mirror, a single chair by the window, and a shelf of books she had collected over the years. She changed into her Sunday dress, the nicest thing she owned, deep green cotton with black trim at the collar and cuffs. It had been new 3 years ago. Now it was simply well maintained. She pinned her dark hair up carefully, studying her reflection. She was not beautiful like Josephine. Her face was too serious, her features too plain. Her hands were marked by work, the calluses of holding chalk, the ink stains that never quite washed away, the strength that came from carrying water and splitting kindling. She was 29 years old, unmarried, and likely to remain so. That fact had become painfully clear 6 months ago when Marcus Thornton, the banker's son, had ended their understanding. They had been courting for nearly 2 years, and Clara had allowed herself to believe that perhaps she might have a different life. But Marcus's father had made his position clear. His son would not marry a schoolteacher with no family wealth and no prospects. Marcus, to his shame, had agreed. He had come to her boarding house on a Wednesday evening and told her, with obvious discomfort that they could no longer see each other. "You must understand, Clara," he had said, turning his hat in his hands. "I have responsibilities, expectations. You're a fine woman, truly, but you're not—" He had stopped there, unable or unwilling to finish the sentence. Not suitable. Not wealthy. Not enough. She had not cried in front of him. She had thanked him for his honesty, closed the door, and then stood there in the gathering darkness of her small room, feeling something crack open inside her chest. Not heartbreak, exactly. She had not loved Marcus, not truly, but she had loved the idea of being chosen, of being wanted, of building a life with someone. After that, she had buried herself in her work. She read more, walked longer, spent her evenings writing in her journal, observations about her students, poetry she would never show anyone, sketches of the prairie landscape she could see from her window. She told herself she was content. Most days, she almost believed it. The knock on her door came just after 5 o'clock. Mrs. Hennessy stood in the hallway, her round face flushed with exertion from climbing the stairs. "Miss Wells, there's a boy here with a message. Says it's urgent from your uncle's house." Clara's stomach tightened. She followed Mrs. Hennessy downstairs to find a young messenger holding a sealed envelope. She recognized the paper, expensive stock, cream-colored, her uncle's mark in the wax seal. She broke it open and read quickly. The message was brief and desperate. Josephine had fallen ill with a sudden fever. She was confined to bed on doctor's orders and could not possibly travel. But the train left tonight, and someone from the Harrison ranch was being sent to escort the bride westward. The arrangements had been made. The expectations set. Uncle Frederick begged Clara to go to the station in Josephine's place to explain the situation to the escort, and to offer the family sincere apologies for the delay. Clara read the message twice, her mind racing. She looked at the clock on Mrs. Hennessy's mantel. The train arrived in less than 2 hours. She could make it to the station if she hurried, but something made her pause. The wording of the letter was strange. Her uncle had written, "Stand in for Josephine at the station," not "meet the escort for Josephine, stand in for her," as if Clara was meant to be seen as Josephine herself. Why would that matter unless— She understood suddenly. Her uncle was protecting his business arrangement. If word got out that the bride had backed out at the last moment, even due to illness, it might damage the agreement. Better to have someone there, someone who could smooth things over, someone who could perhaps buy time. Clara should have said no, should have sent a message back saying she could not possibly. But something in her stirred, that same reckless curiosity that had made her climb trees as a girl, that had made her read books her mother said were unsuitable, that had made her choose teaching over the safer path of being a governess in some wealthy household. What would it be like, just for an evening, to be mistaken for someone else? To be the wealthy heiress instead of the poor schoolteacher? To be the woman someone had traveled to collect, to escort, to value? She found herself nodding to the messenger. "Tell my uncle I'll go." The boy ran off. Mrs. Hennessy was watching her with sharp eyes. "What are you up to, Clara Wells?" "Just helping family," Clara said. Though her heart was beating faster than it should, she packed quickly, threw a few things into a carpet bag, though she did not plan to go anywhere except the station and back. But appearances mattered. She needed to look the part, at least temporarily. She borrowed a nicer shawl from Mrs. Hennessy, tucked her worn journal into the bag. She could never travel anywhere without it, and hurried toward the train station as the sun began its descent toward the horizon. The Millbrook station was small, just a platform, a ticket office, and a water tower. A handful of people waited for the evening train. Clara stood apart from them, clutching her bag, her nerves singing. She told herself she would simply explain the situation. That was all. A simple misunderstanding to clear up. The train arrived in a great huffing of steam and screech of brakes. A few passengers disembarked, and then she saw him. He was tall, perhaps 35, with the kind of weathered face that spoke of years spent outdoors. His clothes were clean but worn. Canvas pants, a work shirt, a leather vest, boots that had seen hard use. He wore a wide-brimmed hat that shadowed his eyes, but Clara could see they were a light color, perhaps blue or gray. He carried himself with quiet confidence, moving through the small crowd with purpose, scanning faces. His gaze landed on Clara and stopped. He studied her for a moment, and she felt herself being assessed, measured against some internal description he had been given. She should have spoken immediately, should have said, "I'm not who you think I am," but the words caught in her throat. He approached, removed his hat. "Miss Josephine Wells." His voice was low, respectful. There was kindness in it and something else, a weariness, perhaps. A man doing his duty but not necessarily happy about it. Clara's mouth went dry. She could still correct this, should correct this, but instead she heard herself say, "Yes." The single word felt like stepping off a cliff. The moment it left her lips, she knew she had done something foolish, something potentially dangerous. But she did not take it back. "Thomas Clay, ma'am. I'm the foreman at the Broken Arrow. Mr. Harrison sent me to escort you to the ranch." He glanced at her small carpet bag. "Is this all your luggage?" Yes. I travel light." That much was true. Something flickered in his expression. Surprise, perhaps. He had expected more. Of course he had. A wealthy heiress would arrive with trunks, with hat boxes, with all the trappings of her station. But he simply nodded. "We have a wagon. It's about a week's journey to the ranch. We'll need to leave now to make the first campsite before full dark." A week. Clara's heart hammered. She had thought this would be a brief conversation, a quick explanation. But he was expecting to leave immediately, to travel with her for a week. And she had just claimed to be someone she was not. She should have confessed then. But Thomas Clay was already reaching for her bag, gesturing toward a wagon hitched at the far end of the platform. And Clara found herself following him, her mind spinning with what she had done, unable to find the words to undo it. The wagon was sturdy and practical, supplies loaded in the back, 2 horses harnessed at the front. Thomas helped her up onto the bench seat with careful propriety, then climbed up beside her. He released the brake, clicked to the horses, and they lurched forward. As Millbrook fell away behind them and the prairie opened up ahead, golden in the late sunlight, Clara clutched her bag and tried to understand what she had just done. She had agreed to impersonate her cousin, to travel alone with a stranger for a week, to arrive at a ranch where she would be expected to meet a man she was supposedly going to marry. It was madness, complete madness. But as the evening breeze caught her hair and the vast sky spread above them, Clara felt something she had not felt in months, not since Marcus had told her she was not enough. For the first time in a long time, she felt awake, alive, seen. Thomas Clay sat beside her, his attention on the road ahead. He had not spoken since they left the station, but there was something in the way he had looked at her, something that had made her breath catch, as if he was seeing not just a wealthy heiress, not just a duty to be fulfilled, but a person worth noticing. She knew she would have to tell him the truth, soon, before they went too far. But for now, just for this evening, she let herself be someone else, someone worth escorting across the prairie, someone worth the journey. The sun touched the horizon, painting the clouds in shades of amber and rose. Thomas Clay finally spoke. "It's beautiful country," he said quietly. "I hope you'll come to love it." Clara looked out at the endless prairie, at the sky stretching forever, at the road unwinding before them into the unknown. "I think I already do," she said. And she meant it. They traveled until the light failed completely. Thomas guided the wagon off the main trail to a stand of cottonwood trees near a creek. The sound of running water was peaceful in the gathering darkness. Clara sat on the wagon bench, uncertain what to do, watching as Thomas moved with practiced efficiency, unhitching the horses, leading them to water, gathering deadfall for a fire. She wanted to help, but did not know if a wealthy heiress would offer to help, would not know how to help. So she remained seated, feeling useless and fraudulent, until Thomas glanced over at her. "You can stretch your legs if you like, Miss Wells. It's safe here. I've camped this spot before." She climbed down gratefully, her body stiff from the journey. The night air was cool and smelled of prairie grass and wood smoke as Thomas coaxed a small fire to life. He had brought supplies, beans, coffee, salt pork. He set about preparing a simple meal with the same quiet efficiency he had shown with everything else. Clara watched him work, noting the economy of his movements, the way his hands knew exactly what to do. There was something deeply competent about him, something steady. She found herself wondering about his life, his past, what had brought him to this work. "May I help?" she finally asked, unable to simply sit and watch. He looked up, surprise clear on his face. "That's kind of you, ma'am, but not necessary. You should rest." But Clara had already moved closer to the fire. "My hands are not too delicate for useful work," she said, then immediately regretted it. Too honest, too revealing. A wealthy heiress would not be so eager to labor. Thomas studied her for a moment, something shifting in his expression. "All right, then. You can tend the coffee if you like." He showed her where the pot sat at the edge of the coals, how to judge when it was ready. Their hands brushed as he passed her the tin cup for testing, and Clara felt an unexpected warmth spread through her chest. She focused on the coffee, trying to ignore the flutter of her pulse. They ate in comfortable silence, sitting on opposite sides of the fire. The beans were simple but good. The coffee was strong and black. Clara found she was hungrier than she had realized, and she ate without pretense. Without the delicate picking she imagined Josephine would have displayed. When Thomas looked up and saw her empty plate, a small smile touched his lips. "Good appetite." "That's good. You'll need your strength for the journey ahead." Clara felt heat rise in her cheeks, but it was not entirely from embarrassment. There was approval in his tone and something else. Appreciation, perhaps. "Tell me about the ranch," she said, eager to shift attention away from herself. "What is it like there?" Thomas poured himself more coffee, his face thoughtful in the firelight. "The Broken Arrow has been there 30 years. Mr. Harrison built it with his own hands, him and his wife Emma. She passed 5 years back. Cancer. He's never been quite the same since. The ranch is his life now, 10,000 acres, cattle and horses, about 20 men working the place. It's hard country but honest country. People who work there tend to stay. And you? How long have you been there?" 3 years. "I came west after—" He stopped, something tightening in his jaw. "After my wife died. Needed a fresh start. Needed hard work to fill the days. Mr. Harrison gave me that." Clara's heart ached at the grief in his voice, carefully controlled but unmistakable. "I'm sorry for your loss," she said quietly. Thomas nodded, staring into the fire. Margaret was her name. "She was a good woman, kind. We were only married 2 years when—" Again he stopped, unable or unwilling to finish. "The child didn't survive either. A daughter." The words hung in the night air between them. Clara felt the weight of his sorrow, and her own deception felt suddenly monstrous. This man had trusted her with something precious, his pain, his history, and she was lying to him with every breath. "I'm sure they would want you to be happy," Clara said softly. "To live fully again." Thomas looked at her then, really looked at her, and something passed between them, a moment of genuine connection that made Clara's breath catch. "Perhaps," he said. "I'm beginning to think that might be possible." The moment stretched, intimate and fragile. Then Thomas stood abruptly, breaking the spell. "You should get some rest. We have a long day tomorrow." He had prepared a bedroll for her in the wagon bed, sheltered and separate from where he would sleep by the fire. It was thoughtful, protective. Clara climbed into the wagon, wrapped herself in the blanket, and lay staring up at the stars, visible through the cottonwood branches. She had to tell him, tomorrow. As soon as morning came, she would confess everything. It was wrong to let this continue, wrong to accept his trust, his care under false pretenses. She would tell him, face whatever anger or disappointment he felt, and find a way back to Millbrook. Surely he would understand. Surely he would see it had been a foolish mistake, nothing more. But even as she thought this, she knew it was not entirely true. Part of her, a part she was not proud of, wanted to hold on to this a little longer, to be the woman he thought she was, to be chosen, escorted, protected, to feel the way his eyes had looked at her across the fire. She fell into restless sleep, her dreams troubled and strange. Morning came grey and heavy. Clara woke to the smell of coffee and the sound of horses moving. Thomas already had the fire going, breakfast prepared. He greeted her with a nod, but seemed distracted, his attention on the sky. "Storm coming," he said. "Can you feel it?" "Pressure's dropping. We'll need to make good time today. Find proper shelter by evening." Clara looked at the clouds massing in the west, dark and thick, moving toward them with unsettling speed. "How far to the next town?" "Too far. But I know a place, an old homestead, abandoned. Not much, but it has a roof and walls. Better than being caught in the open." They broke camp quickly, ate while traveling, pushed the horses harder than the day before. The wind picked up as the morning wore on, bringing the smell of rain and something electric in the air. The prairie, so peaceful the night before, now seemed vast and exposed. Clara found herself gripping the edge of the wagon bench as the first fat drops began to fall. Thomas urged the horses faster. The rain intensified, coming in sheets now, soaking through Clara's clothes despite her shawl. Thunder rumbled in the distance, growing closer. The horses were nervous, tossing their heads, but Thomas kept them steady with voice and rein. Finally, as lightning split the sky, Clara saw it, a small structure in the distance, wooden and weathered, leaning slightly but intact. Thomas guided the wagon toward it, and they reached the shelter just as the full fury of the storm broke overhead. The homestead was a single room, empty except for dust and shadows. But it was dry, and it had 4 walls and a door that still closed. Thomas unhitched the horses quickly, led them to the lean-to attached to one side where they would be sheltered, then grabbed supplies from the wagon and ushered Clara inside. They stood dripping in the dimness, breathing hard from the rush. Water ran from Clara's hair down her back. Her dress clung to her uncomfortably. Thomas's shirt was soaked through, revealing the shape of his shoulders and chest in a way that made Clara look away quickly. "Are you all right?" he asked, water dripping from his hat brim. "Yes, thank you." "That was close, too close. Should have started earlier." He sounded angry with himself. "You couldn't have known the storm would move so fast." He shook his head, already moving to assess their situation. There was an old fireplace, the chimney apparently intact. He began building a fire with practiced hands, while Clara hugged herself, shivering slightly. The temperature had dropped with the rain, and her wet clothes were cold against her skin. The fire caught, flickered, grew. Warmth began to fill the small space. Thomas hung his hat on a nail in the wall, ran his hand through his wet hair. "You should try to dry off." I'll step outside, check on the horses." "In this weather? They need to be calmed. The thunder frightens them." He was giving her privacy, Clara realized. A chance to change, to compose herself. She waited until he was gone, then quickly stripped off her wet outer dress, hanging it near the fire. She wrapped herself in a dry blanket from the supplies, sat by the fire and tried to stop shaking. When Thomas returned, he was carrying something that had fallen from his pocket, a small silver locket, tarnished and worn. Clara saw it clearly before he noticed, saw the way he quickly closed his hand around it, as if caught with something private. "You dropped this," she said, though it was obvious. He looked at the locket in his palm, his expression unreadable. "It was Margaret's," he said finally. "I kept it after, I don't know why. Can't seem to let it go." Clara rose, moved closer without thinking. "May I see it?" He hesitated, then opened the locket. Inside was a photograph, tiny and faded. A young woman with dark hair and gentle eyes. Beautiful in a quiet way. "She looks kind," Clara said. She was. Thomas closed the locket, his hand trembling slightly. "Thank you for not prying. Most people would have pressed for more. Everyone has their private griefs," Clara said quietly. "They deserve to be respected." Thomas looked at her, and in his eyes Clara saw surprise, as if she had revealed something unexpected about herself. As if she was not quite what he had been told to expect. The moment stretched between them, charged with more than the storm raging outside. Clara knew she should step back, should maintain distance. But something held her there, close enough to feel the heat from his body, close enough to see the way his chest rose and fell with each breath. Thunder crashed directly overhead, making them both jump. The moment broke. Thomas moved away, busying himself with the fire. Clara returned to her blanket, her heart racing for reasons that had nothing to do with the storm. They would be here all night, she realized. Alone together in this small space, with the rain hammering down and nowhere else to go. And she still had not told him the truth. With every hour that passed, it became harder to imagine how she would. The storm passed in the hours before dawn, leaving the world washed clean and glistening. Clara woke to find Thomas already outside, checking the wagon and horses. She had slept fitfully, aware of his presence on the other side of the small room, aware of how close they were, aware of how wrong this all was. She dressed quickly in her now dry clothes and stepped outside. The prairie stretched before them, transformed by rain. Every blade of grass jeweled with water, the air impossibly fresh and sweet. The morning sun broke through the clouds in long golden rays, and for a moment Clara forgot her guilt in the simple beauty of it. "Sleep all right?" Thomas asked, his tone carefully neutral. "Well enough. And you?" "I've slept in worse places." He finished hitching the horses, then turned to her. "We should make good time today. The trail will be muddy in places, but the horses are rested." They set off into the sparkling morning, and something had shifted between them. The forced proximity of the night before had broken down some invisible barrier. Thomas was more talkative, pointing out landmarks, teaching her to read the land. "See those tracks there? Deer probably came down to drink after the rain. And there, you can tell by the way the grass is bent which direction the wind usually comes from. You learn to read these things when you spend enough time out here." Clara absorbed everything like the teacher she was, asking questions, making observations. Thomas seemed pleased by her genuine interest, warming to the subject. He showed her how to identify edible plants, how to tell if water was safe to drink, how the clouds in this country could tell you what the next day would bring. "You learn quickly," he said, and there was respect in his voice. "Most city folk don't have the patience for it." Clara felt a pang. She was not really a city person either, but she could not tell him that. Could not tell him about her small-town life, her schoolhouse, her students. Instead, she said, "I've always been interested in learning, in understanding how things work. That's a rare quality." He glanced at her, something thoughtful in his expression. "Rare in anyone, but especially—" He stopped himself. "Especially what?" "Nothing. Just, you're not quite what I expected, Miss Wells." The words sent a chill through Clara. He was starting to notice. Of course he was. She was not performing her role well enough, not acting like the wealthy heiress he had been sent to collect. She was being too curious, too capable, too much herself. They stopped at midday to rest the horses and eat. Thomas had found a spot near a small creek, sheltered by a few scraggly trees. While he tended to the animals, Clara wandered along the water's edge, stretching her legs. She noticed the wildflowers first, small purple blooms growing in a cluster near the water. They were beautiful in their simplicity, surviving and thriving in this harsh landscape. She was studying them when Thomas appeared beside her so quietly she startled. "Prairie asters," he said. "They bloom late in the season. Most things are dying back now, but these keep going." He knelt, gently picked one, and offered it to her with an awkwardness that was somehow endearing. His hand trembled slightly as he held it out, and Clara realized this was difficult for him, this small gesture of courtship, of connection. How long had it been since he had offered a flower to a woman? "Thank you," she said softly, taking it. Their fingers brushed, and neither pulled away immediately. "I should tell you something," Thomas said, his voice rough. "About the arrangements. About what's expected when we arrive." Clara's heart began to pound. "All right. Robert Harrison is Mr. Harrison's grandson. He's been away in San Francisco for the past 3 months, setting up business connections. He's due back at the ranch 2 weeks from now. 2 weeks. Clara's relief was immediate and guilty. That bought her time. Time to figure out how to extricate herself from this mess. The understanding is, Thomas continued, his eyes on the creek rather than her face, that you and Robert would meet, spend some time together, and if both parties are agreeable, marry within the month. Mr. Harrison is eager to see his grandson settled. He's getting older, wants to know the family line will continue, that the ranch will stay in good hands. Clara felt the weight of it, the expectations, the pressure. the lives that would be affected by her deception. And you? What do you think of this arrangement? Thomas was quiet for a long moment. I think arranged marriages are a gamble. Sometimes they work out, sometimes they don't. But I'll be honest with you, I'm not sure Robert is the right man for you. Why do you say that? He's ambitious, driven, always thinking about expansion, profit, what's next. There's nothing wrong with that, understand? But I don't think he sees the small things, the prairie asters, the way the light changes, the value in understanding how things work. He looked at her then, and the intensity in his gaze made her breath catch. You deserve someone who sees those things in you, who appreciates them. Clara knew she should move away, should create distance. But instead she found herself asking, and do you see those things? Thomas's jaw tightened. He looked like a man at war with himself. I see them, he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. God help me, but I see them. The moment stretched between them, dangerous and electric. Then Thomas stood abruptly, putting physical distance between them, even as the emotional distance narrowed to nothing. We should keep moving, he said, his tone carefully controlled. Still have ground to cover. Clara pressed the wildflower carefully in her journal that evening when they made camp. She told herself it meant nothing. A simple gesture, a polite offering, but she knew it was more than that. She knew by the way her hand trembled as she closed the journal, by the way her heart ached when she watched Thomas across the campfire. He was a good man, an honest man, a man who had suffered loss and was slowly, carefully opening himself to the possibility of feeling again. And she was lying to him. Every moment she stayed silent was another thread of deception woven between them. That night, as Thomas shared his story, the details of Margaret's death, the child they lost, the years he spent wandering in grief before landing at the Broken Arrow, Clara felt something break inside her. He was trusting her with his pain, his history, his heart. And she was a fraud. I haven't talked about this with anyone, he said, staring into the fire. But something about you makes it easier. Makes me feel like maybe it's all right to remember, to feel again. Clara's throat was tight. You honor me with your trust. You're easy to trust, he said simply. And then, almost shyly, I'm glad it was me they sent to collect you. Glad I got this time. She should have told him then. Should have confessed everything, accepted whatever consequences came. But the words would not come. Instead, she said, I'm glad too. It was the truest thing she had said since this began. And that made the lie even worse. That night she lay awake in the wagon, listening to the prairie sounds, the wind, the distant coyotes, Thomas's steady breathing by the fire. She touched the pressed flower in her journal and made a promise to herself. Tomorrow she would tell him everything. She would face his anger, his disappointment, whatever came. She could not do this to him anymore. But even as she made this promise, she knew how hard it would be to keep. With every mile they traveled together, with every story he shared, with every moment his eyes met hers across the fire, she was falling deeper into something that could never be, something built on sand. Clara woke with the sun, her resolve hardened by a restless night. Today, she would tell Thomas today, before another mile passed, before another story was shared. She rehearsed the words in her mind as she dressed. I need to tell you something. I'm not who you think I am. But when she climbed down from the wagon, Thomas was already preparing breakfast, and the words died on her lips. He looked up with a smile, a rare, genuine smile that transformed his usually serious face, and handed her a cup of coffee. Morning. Sleep better? Yes, thank you. The lie came automatically. Thomas, We'll reach Granger Settlement by noon, he interrupted, not hearing her attempt at confession. We can stop there, send word to the ranch that we're making good time. Get proper provisions, maybe even a hot meal at the boarding house, a settlement, people, telegraph. Clara's stomach tightened. A telegraph office? Sure, why? You need to send word to someone? No, I wondered. But she was wondering about something else entirely. If there was a telegraph office, there might be messages. Messages from Josephine, from Uncle Frederick, from anyone who knew the truth of this situation. Messages that would expose her deception before she could control how Thomas learned of it. They ate quickly and set off, Clara's mind racing. She watched the landscape roll by, trying to find the courage to speak, but Thomas kept up a steady stream of conversation about the settlement, the people there, the supplies they needed. Every attempt she made to interrupt was gently overridden by his enthusiasm for showing her this small piece of his world. When they crested the final rise and Granger's settlement came into view, Clara's heart sank. It was larger than she had expected. Perhaps 50 buildings, a proper main street, signs of prosperity. The kind of place that would have reliable telegraph service. The kind of place where her deception might unravel. Thomas guided the wagon down the main street, nodding to people who called greetings. He was known here, respected here. He pulled up in front of the general store and helped Clara down. "I'll get the supplies if you want to stretch your legs. There's a telegraph office just down the street if you want to send any messages. And the boarding house serves lunch from noon to 2. Clara's mouth was dry. "I think I'll just walk a bit. Clear my head." She watched Thomas disappear into the store, then turned toward the telegraph office almost against her will. She had to know, had to see if anything had been sent. The office was small, run by an elderly man who looked up from his desk with friendly curiosity. "Help you, miss. Is there a message here for Josephine Wells? Or for the Broken Arrow Ranch?" He checked his log, then pulled a slip of paper from a box on his desk. "Came through yesterday. Already forwarded to the ranch, but I keep copies for a day or so." "You're Miss Wells?" Clara's blood ran cold. "May I see it?" He passed it across the desk. The message was brief, sent from her Uncle Frederick. "Josephine recovered. Will arrive by month's end. Apologize for confusion, the world tilted." Clara gripped the edge of the desk. The telegram had been forwarded to the ranch. It was already on its way there, or perhaps had already arrived. When she and Thomas showed up, they would know. They would know immediately that she was not Josephine Wells, that she was an imposter. "You all right, miss? You look pale." "I'm fine. Thank you." Clara stumbled out of the office, her mind whirling. She had perhaps a day, maybe 2. Before they reached the ranch and everything fell apart. She had to tell Thomas now, had to explain before he heard it from someone else. She found him loading supplies into the wagon. "Thomas, I need to speak with you." "It's important." "Of course. Let me just—" He was interrupted by a shout from down the street. A family stood beside a wagon with a broken wheel, the father looking frustrated, the mother trying to calm 3 young children. Thomas saw them and immediately started walking toward them. "Hold that thought. These folks need help," Clara followed, frustration warring with admiration. Of course he would stop. Of course he would help. It was who he was, a man who saw people in need and acted. For the next 2 hours, Clara watched Thomas work. He assessed the broken wheel, sent a boy running for tools, enlisted help from other men in the settlement. Clara found herself naturally gravitating toward the mother, helping to keep the children occupied, sharing some of their food supplies with the family, who had clearly been traveling on very little. The mother was grateful, talking to Clara as if to an equal. "You're a blessing, miss. Most fancy ladies wouldn't lower themselves to help folks like us." Clara felt the familiar twist of guilt. "We're all just people trying to get by. Your man there is a good one. You're lucky. He's not my—" Clara started, then stopped. What could she say? "Yes, he's very good." When the wheel was finally repaired and the family on their way, Thomas came to where Clara sat on the porch of the general store, dust on his clothes, sweat on his brow. He looked tired but satisfied. "Sorry that took so long, but they would have been stuck there until nightfall if someone didn't help." "You did the right thing," Clara said. And she meant it. She had watched him work with such care, such patience, showing the father how to make the repair so he could do it himself next time. Teaching, not just fixing. She had watched him with the children, making them laugh, easing their worry. He was kind all the way through, and she was lying to him. They took their lunch at the boarding house. Simple food, well prepared. Over stew and bread, Clara tried again. "Thomas, there's something I need to tell you." "I'm listening." But just then the boarding house owner came over, an older woman with sharp eyes and a kind face. Mr. Clay, good to see you again. And this must be the bride. Welcome, dear. I hope you'll be happy at the Broken Arrow. She bustled away before Clara could respond. Thomas was watching her with that thoughtful expression again. You keep starting to tell me something. What is it? Clara looked at his honest face, at the concern in his eyes, and felt the words lodge in her throat. If she told him now, here in public, what would happen? Would he be angry? Humiliated? Would he feel betrayed? Not just by her deception, but by the fact that he had begun to care. I'm nervous, she said finally. About meeting Mr. Harrison, about meeting Robert, about all of it. It was not what she had meant to say, but it was true enough. Thomas's expression softened. He reached across the table, stopped just short of taking her hand, then pulled back. Anyone would be nervous. But you don't have to worry. He seemed to struggle for words. You're genuine, real. That matters more than anything else. The irony was a knife in Clara's chest. She was the opposite of genuine. She was a complete fabrication. They left Granger's settlement in the early afternoon, the wagon heavy with supplies. Clara sat beside Thomas in silence, the pressed wildflower in her journal, the telegram message burned into her mind. She had one day, maybe two, and then the truth would come out whether she was ready or not. That evening they camped by a small creek. Thomas built the fire, prepared their meal, and they ate in a comfortable silence that felt like a kind of intimacy. When the stars came out, Thomas pointed out constellations, told her the names of stars, shared stories his father had told him as a boy. Do you ever think about legacy? He asked suddenly. What we leave behind? Clara looked at the vast sky, feeling small and foolish and strangely alive all at once. I think about purpose, about whether our lives matter, whether we make a difference. You will, Thomas said with certainty. You already do. She wanted to ask what he meant, but she was afraid of the answer. Afraid of how much his opinion had come to matter. Afraid of how deeply she had fallen into this impossible situation. That night, she lay in the wagon and touched the pressed flower. She thought about the telegram, about the reckoning that was coming, and she made a different kind of promise. When the truth came out, and it would come out, she would not run from it. She would face Thomas, face his disappointment, and accept whatever consequences came. It was the least she could do for a man who had shown her what it meant to be truly seen. The fifth day brought them into rougher country. The flat prairie gave way to rolling hills, with steep rocky passages that required careful navigation. Thomas had to help Clara down from the wagon several times, guiding it over particularly treacherous sections while she walked alongside. Each time his hands steadied her over loose stones or around sharp drops. Clara felt the careful restraint in his touch, the way he held her only as much as necessary, released her as soon as she was safe, but the touches accumulated. His hand on her elbow, his arm around her waist when she stumbled, the way he lifted her back into the wagon, his hands spanning her waist for just a moment longer than required. Each contact was proper, respectful, but Clara felt them like small electric shocks, awareness building with each one. By noon, they reached a creek that ran through a small valley, the water clear and cold from somewhere upstream. Thomas declared it a good place to rest the horses and take a proper break. He helped Clara down, another touch, another moment of awareness, and she walked to the water's edge while he tended to the animals. The creek was beautiful, edged with smooth stones and overhanging willow trees. Without thinking, Clara unlaced her boots, pulled off her stockings, and waded into the shallow water. It was shockingly cold, but wonderfully refreshing after the dust and heat of the trail. She heard Thomas laugh, a sound so rare and genuine it made her turn. He stood on the bank, hands on his hips, shaking his head with something like affection. What? She asked, suddenly self-conscious. Nothing. Just, you're full of surprises, Miss Wells. Is that a bad thing? No. His voice softened. It's a very good thing. He pulled off his own boots and joined her, rolling up his pant legs and wading in. They stood in the cold water, cooling their feet, and Clara felt a moment of pure joy, simple, uncomplicated, real. I haven't done this since I was a boy, Thomas said. My father used to take me fishing. We'd wade in the creek for hours. Tell me about him. Thomas's face grew thoughtful. He was a good man, quiet like me, worked a small farm in Missouri, taught me about the land, about weather, about treating people fairly. He died when I was 17. I think about him a lot out here. They shared lunch by the creek, sitting on the bank with their feet still bare. Thomas retrieved something from his saddlebag, a worn leather Bible, the cover soft with age and handling. He held it carefully, reverently. This was Margaret's, he said. She read it every night, made notes in the margins, underlined passages that meant something to her. He opened it, and Clara saw the handwriting, a woman's careful script, notes and thoughts written alongside the printed verses. It was intimate seeing these private reflections. Like glimpsing someone's soul, Thomas found a passage, read it aloud, "The truth will set you free." His finger traced Margaret's note beneath it. "Even when truth is hard, it's the only path to real peace." Clara felt those words like a blow. The truth, the thing she had been avoiding, postponing, running from. She looked at Thomas's face, saw how he treasured his late wife's wisdom, how he held her memory with such care. And she knew with absolute certainty that he would value truth above almost anything else. She was wise, Clara said quietly. She was. Thomas closed the Bible carefully. "I haven't talked about her this much in 3 years, but somehow with you it feels right, like she'd approve." The words were meant as a compliment, but they felt like condemnation. Would Margaret approve of what Clara was doing? Of the lies, the deception, the way she was allowing this good man to develop feelings built on false foundations? They were packing up to leave when they encountered other travelers, a middle-aged couple in a modest wagon, the man wearing a preacher's collar. They hailed Thomas and Clara with friendly waves. "Good afternoon, friends. I'm Reverend John Winters, and this is my wife, Catherine. We're headed east to visit family. Would you folks be interested in sharing a camp tonight? Always safer to travel in numbers, and Catherine makes the best cornbread west of the Mississippi." Thomas looked at Clara, and she nodded. The company would be welcome, even if it complicated things, or perhaps especially because it complicated things, made it harder for the quiet intimacy between her and Thomas to deepen further. They made camp together that evening, pooling resources. Catherine Winters was warm and talkative, asking gentle questions about their journey. Thomas kept their story vague, said only that he was escorting a lady to the Broken Arrow Ranch. But Catherine watched them with knowing eyes, the way only an older married woman could. While the men tended to the horses, Catherine drew Clara aside. "You're in love with him. It was not a question." Clara felt heat rise in her face. "I barely know him. Sometimes it doesn't take long to know. I knew with John after 3 days." Catherine smiled kindly. "But you look troubled, dear. Worried about something?" Clara felt tears prick her eyes, the first time since this began that she had felt close to crying. "I'm not who he thinks I am." Catherine's expression grew concerned. "What do you mean?" Clara stopped, realizing she could not explain without revealing everything. I'm nervous. About expectations. About living up to what people think I should be." Catherine patted her hand, misunderstanding. "We all feel that way sometimes, but that man looks at you like you hung the moon. Whatever he thinks you should be, I guarantee you're already more than enough. Just be yourself, dear. That's always enough for someone who truly sees you." That evening, Reverend Winters suggested they share evening prayers together. The 4 of them sat around the fire as the sun set, and the Reverend spoke about new beginnings, about honesty, about the courage to face truth even when it is difficult. "Lord," he prayed, "grant us the strength to be honest, with ourselves, with each other, with you. Help us to build our lives on solid foundations, not on shifting sand. And help us to forgive ourselves and others when we fall short." Thomas reached for Clara's hand during the prayer. It was the first time he had deliberately initiated touch, not to help her over rocks or into the wagon, but simply to connect. His hand was warm, calloused, steady. Clara held on, feeling the rightness of it war with the wrongness of everything that had brought them here. When the prayer ended, Thomas did not let go immediately. He looked at their joined hands, then at her face, and Clara saw everything she felt reflected back, the longing, the impossibility. the sense of something precious slipping through their fingers even as they tried to hold on. "I know we just met," he said quietly, so only she could hear. "But I feel I've known you always." Clara's throat was tight. "I feel the same way." It was perhaps the most honest thing she had said to him, and also the cruelest. Because how could she feel she knew him when he did not truly know her? When every moment of connection was built on her deception? That night, lying in her bedroll with the Winters couple snoring softly nearby and Thomas keeping watch by the fire, Clara made her final decision: tomorrow. She would tell him tomorrow before they got any closer to the ranch. She would confess everything: her real identity, her initial reasons, her growing feelings. She would give him the truth he deserved, even if it meant losing whatever chance they might have had. They parted ways with the Winters couple at first light. Catherine embraced Clara like a mother, whispering, "Be brave, dear. Trust in truth." The words felt like a benediction and a warning. The 6th day stretched ahead, their last full day alone before reaching the ranch. Clara could feel the weight of it, see it reflected in Thomas's quieter manner. He seemed thoughtful, almost melancholy, as if he too felt their time together slipping away. "There's a place I want to show you," he said, as the morning wore on. "A bit off the main trail, but worth it, if you're willing." "How far off the trail?" "An hour, maybe 2. We'll still make good time." Clara knew she should say no, should insist they push straight through to the ranch, where the truth would come out and this impossible situation would end. But she found herself nodding. "I'd like that." Thomas's face lit up with something that made Clara's heart ache. He guided the wagon off the main route, following a barely visible track through the tall grass. The land rose gradually, and after an hour they crested a hill that took Clara's breath away. Below them stretched a valley painted in autumn colors: golden grasses, deep green junipers, the silver thread of a creek winding through it all. Beyond the valley, mountains rose in purple shadows against the sky. It was beautiful in a way that made Clara understand why Thomas loved this country, why he had chosen to make it his home. "I come here sometimes," Thomas said quietly, "when I need to remember why I stayed, why I kept going after Margaret died." Clara climbed down from the wagon without waiting for his help. She walked to the edge of the overlook, drinking in the view. The wind caught her hair, pulling it loose from its pins. She did not care. She felt wild and free and heartbroken all at once. Thomas stood beside her, not touching, but close enough that she could feel the warmth of him. "Beautiful, isn't it?" "It's extraordinary." She pulled out her journal, found a pencil.
"May I?"
"Sketch it." "Of course." She sat on a flat rock and began to draw, her hand moving quickly across the page. The sweep of the valley, the curve of the creek, the distant mountains. She lost herself in it the way she always did, the world narrowing to just line and shadow and shape. When she looked up, Thomas was watching her with an expression she could not quite read. "May I see?" She hesitated, then showed him the sketch. He studied it for a long moment, his calloused finger tracing the lines she had drawn. "This is remarkable. You have real talent. I've always loved to draw, to capture moments before they slip away. Where did you learn?" Clara's mind raced. She could not mention her normal school training, could not talk about the art classes she had taken. "I had tutors growing up. One of them recognized the interest and encouraged it." It was close enough to the truth. Her mother had paid for those classes by taking in mending, seeing something in Clara that deserved nurturing even when money was scarce. But it was still a lie of omission, still another thread of deception. Thomas handed back the journal, but not before she saw him notice something, other sketches on previous pages. "You've drawn other things on this journey." It was not a question. Clara felt her face heat. She had sketched the prairie, the storms, the settlements. And yes, she had sketched Thomas several times, trying to capture the line of his jaw, the thoughtful way he looked at the horizon, the rare beauty of his smile. "May I?" he asked, reaching for the journal again. She should have said no. But instead, she let him take it, watched as he paged through carefully, saw the moment he found the drawings of himself. His expression shifted, surprise, pleasure, something deeper she could not name. "Clara," he said, And it was the first time he had used her first name, dropping the formal Miss Wells. "I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything. I wanted to remember." He looked at her then, really looked at her, and Clara saw her own feelings mirrored in his face. The longing, the impossibility, the sense that they had found something precious at exactly the wrong time. "I need to tell you something," Thomas said, his voice rough. "About Robert. About this whole arrangement, all right. I don't think he's the right man for you. And He stopped, struggling. "I'm not in a position to offer you anything. I'm just a foreman. I don't have land of my own, don't have wealth or prospects. But if I could, if I had the right, what would you do?" Clara asked softly. "I'd ask you to choose me instead." The words hung between them, honest and raw. Clara felt tears prick her eyes. "Thomas, I know it's not possible. I know you have obligations, expectations. I know I'm overstepping. But I had to say it. Had to tell you that these days with you have meant something. That you've meant something." Clara was trembling. She wanted to tell him the truth, wanted to say that there were no obligations, that Robert meant nothing to her, that she was free to choose. But the truth was more complicated than that. The truth was that she was an imposter, a liar, someone who had deceived him from the very beginning. "I wish things were different," she said. And it came out almost as a sob. Thomas moved closer, lifted his hand as if to touch her face, then stopped himself. They stood there inches apart, the wind moving around them, the beautiful valley spread below, neither quite brave enough to close the distance. The moment shattered when they heard hoofbeats approaching. They stepped apart quickly, turned to see a rider cresting the hill behind them, a young man on a bay horse, ranch gear marking him as one of the hands from the Broken Arrow. "Mr. Clay," the rider called, pulling up short. "Been looking for you. Mr. Harrison sent me to meet you, make sure you were on schedule." Thomas's expression went carefully neutral. "We're making good time, Jake. Should arrive tomorrow afternoon." The young man looked between them with obvious curiosity, then seemed to remember his manners. "Ma'am, hope the journey hasn't been too rough." "It's been fine," Clara managed. "Glad to hear it. Everyone's real excited about your arrival, especially after that telegram came yesterday. There was some confusion about it, but Mr. Harrison said not to worry, that everything would be sorted out when you arrived." Clara's blood ran cold. The telegram about Josephine recovering, about her arriving by month's end. They knew or suspected, or were waiting to see what happened when she and Thomas showed up at the ranch. What kind of confusion? Thomas asked, his tone sharp. Jake shrugged. "Don't know the details, sir. Just that Mr. Harrison seemed surprised by something, but said we'd know more tomorrow. Oh, and there's news about Mr. Robert. Came back from San Francisco early. He's at the ranch waiting." Robert, the grandson, the man Josephine was supposed to marry. He was there now, waiting for a bride who would not be the woman he expected. Clara felt the world tilt. Her time had run out. There would be no confession on her terms, no chance to explain before they arrived. Tomorrow they would reach the ranch, and everyone would know what she had done. "We should get moving," Thomas said, his eyes on Clara's pale face. "Jake, you can ride with us or head back." "I'll head back. Give Mr. Harrison word that you'll arrive tomorrow." "See you then, Mom." The young man rode off, leaving them alone again. But the moment was broken. The intimacy shattered. Reality had crashed back in. Thomas moved to help Clara into the wagon, his hands impersonal now, his face closed. "We should make camp soon. One more night on the trail, one more night." Clara looked back at the beautiful valley, at the place where Thomas had almost told her he loved her, where she had almost found the courage to tell him the truth. And she knew that by tomorrow everything would be ruined. The lies would be exposed, his trust would be shattered, and she would lose any chance she might have had to make this right. Clara barely slept. She lay in the wagon, listening to the night sounds, acutely aware that this was her last night before everything fell apart. Thomas had been quiet all evening, withdrawn after Jake's news. They had eaten in near silence, each lost in their own thoughts. The easy companionship of previous nights replaced by tense awareness of what tomorrow would bring. When the first grey light touched the sky, Clara gave up on sleep. She climbed quietly from the wagon, not wanting to wake Thomas, who lay by the dying fire with his hat over his face. She needed to think, to plan, to figure out what she would say when they arrived. She retrieved her carpet bag from the wagon, intending to make herself as presentable as possible for the coming ordeal. As she pulled out her spare dress, her hand brushed something in the bag that did not feel familiar. She frowned, reaching deeper, and felt paper, thick paper, folded and sealed. She pulled out 2 envelopes, both with broken seals, both addressed in her cousin Josephine's distinctive hand. Clara's heart began to pound. These had not been in her bag before, had they? She had packed in such a rush, grabbed Josephine's luggage that her uncle had sent, assumed it was just clothes and necessities. With shaking hands, she opened the first envelope. The letter inside was addressed to Uncle Frederick and Aunt Millicent, dated the day Clara had left for the train station. She read it once, then again, unable to believe what she was seeing. "Dearest Mother and Father, by the time you read this, I will be gone. I cannot go through with this marriage. I know what you expect of me, what you have planned, but I cannot live a lie. I'm in love with Daniel Morrison, the shopkeeper's son, and he loves me. We are leaving together to build a life of our own choosing. I know this will disappoint you, that it may harm Father's business arrangements, but I must be true to my heart. Please forgive me. Your loving daughter, Josephine." Clara stared at the letter, her mind reeling. Josephine had never intended to go to the Broken Arrow. She had used her illness as a cover to run away with someone else, which meant she opened the second envelope with trembling fingers. This one was addressed to Mr. Harrison, written in a masculine hand she did not recognize. The signature at the bottom read, "Robert Harrison. Grandfather, I write to you with news that I hope you will receive with understanding, though I fear it may anger you. I have married. Her name is Elizabeth Crowley, and she is the most remarkable woman I have ever known. We met in San Francisco 6 months ago. She is an actress, and I know that will not please you. But she is also educated, kind, and the only person who has ever made me want to be a better man. I know you arranged for Miss Wells to come to the ranch, but I beg you to release me from that obligation. I cannot marry her when my heart belongs to another. I hope in time you will meet Elizabeth and see what I see in her. Your grandson, Robert." Clara's hands were shaking so hard she nearly dropped the letter. She read it again, trying to process what this meant. Josephine had run away, had never intended to come to the ranch. Robert was already married, did not want to marry Josephine, which meant Clara's breath came short. No one at the ranch was expecting Josephine Wells. Robert did not want a bride. The entire arrangement had fallen apart before it even began. When the telegram from Uncle Frederick had arrived saying Josephine recovered, everyone must have assumed the original bride was still coming. But she was not. She never had been, and Clara had been deceiving Thomas for nothing. She stood there in the dawn light, letters in hand, feeling a strange mix of relief and horror. Relief, because there was no engagement to Josephine to break, no arranged marriage she was interfering with. Horror, because she had lied to Thomas for days, let him develop feelings, let things go so far. All for a deception that had been unnecessary from the start. She heard movement behind her and turned to find Thomas awake, sitting up watching her. "Everything all right?" Clara looked at him, this good, honest man who had shown her what it meant to be truly seen, and knew she could not wait another moment. Could not arrive at the ranch with these secrets still between them. "Thomas, I need to tell you something. Several things, actually." Her voice was shaking. "And you're going to be angry. You have every right to be. But I need you to hear all of it before you decide what to do." He stood, moved toward her with concern on his face. "Clara, what's wrong?" She held up the letters. "I found these in my bag. I didn't know they were there until this morning. One is from Josephine Wells. One is from Robert Harrison. I don't understand. Josephine never intended to come to the Broken Arrow. She ran away with someone else, someone she actually loved. This letter was supposed to reach her parents to explain. And Robert is already married. He got married in San Francisco. He wrote to his grandfather asking to be released from the arrangement. Thomas took the letters, read them both quickly. She watched his face as understanding dawned, saw the confusion, the questions forming. Then why did I come to the train station that day? Why did I let you think I was Josephine? Clara's voice broke. That's what I need to tell you. I'm not Josephine Wells, I never was. My name is Clara Wells. Josephine is my cousin. I'm not an heiress. I'm a school teacher. I live in a boarding house. I have no money, no prospects, no— Wait. Thomas held up his hand, his face going pale. You're not Josephine Wells. No, I'm Clara, Josephine's cousin. I went to the train station that day to explain that Josephine was sick and couldn't come. That's what my uncle asked me to do. But when you called me Miss Josephine Wells, I didn't correct you. I let you believe I was her. And then I got in the wagon with you, and every day since I've been lying to you. About who I am, about why I'm here, about everything. Thomas stared at her, the letters falling from his hand. You've been lying to me. This whole time. Yes, the word was barely a whisper. Why? His voice was hard now, anger breaking through the shock. Why would you do that? Why would you let me think? Why would you let me care about someone who doesn't even exist? She does exist. Clara's voice rose, desperate. I'm Clara, yes, but everything else was real. The conversations, the things I told you about myself, those were all real. I just wasn't who you thought I was. You let me trust you. You let me tell you about Margaret, about my daughter, about things I haven't told anyone in 3 years. And the whole time you were lying. He turned away, his hand going to his face. My God, I was falling in love with you, and you don't even exist. Clara felt tears streaming down her face. I'm sorry. Thomas, I'm so sorry. At first it was just curiosity, just wanting to feel what it was like to be chosen for once in my life. But then I got to know you, and everything changed. I tried to tell you. So many times I tried. But I was scared. Scared of what? Of telling the truth? Of being honest? He whirled back to face her, his eyes blazing. Do you have any idea what you've done? I opened my heart to you. I let myself feel again. And it was all based on a lie. Not all of it. Clara moved toward him, but he stepped back. The way I feel about you, that's real. What we shared, those moments were real. How can I believe anything you say now? How do I know what's real and what's another performance? His voice cracked. I thought you were different. I thought you were genuine. But you're just like everyone else, pretending, playing a role. That's not fair. Fair? Thomas laughed, a bitter sound. You want to talk about fair? You lied to me for 6 days. You let me make a fool of myself. You watched me fall for someone who was a complete fabrication. Clara was sobbing now, unable to stop. I know I did. And I hate myself for it. But Thomas, please listen. Look at these letters. Josephine was never coming. Robert doesn't want a bride. The whole arrangement fell apart before it began. Don't you see? We don't have to— Don't! His voice was cold now, colder than she had ever heard it. Don't try to make this about us. There is no us. There never was. There was just you lying and me being stupid enough to believe you. He walked to the horses, began hitching them to the wagon with sharp, angry movements. Clara stood frozen, the letters in her hand, watching the man she loved close himself off from her with every action. What happens now? She asked quietly. Now? Now I take you to the Broken Arrow. I explained to Mr. Harrison what happened. And then I wash my hands of this entire mess. He did not look at her. Get in the wagon. Thomas, get in the wagon, Clara. He said her name like it tasted bitter. Let's finish this. Clara climbed into the wagon, her whole body shaking. Thomas took his place beside her, but as far from her as possible. He clicked to the horses and they lurched forward, the last mile to the ranch stretching ahead like a road to execution. She had wanted to tell him the truth, had finally done it, but somehow it was worse than she had imagined. She had thought confession would bring relief, maybe even forgiveness. Instead, she had broken something precious, had taken a good man's willingness to love again and shattered it as the Broken Arrow Ranch came into view in the distance. Clara realized that the twist in this story was not that the arranged marriage never existed. The twist was that she had fallen truly in love for the first time in her life and destroyed any chance of it being real. The broken arrow. Ranch spread across the valley like something from a dream or perhaps a nightmare, given Clara's current state of mind. The main house was large and sturdy, built from timber and stone, with a wide porch that wrapped around three sides. Outbuildings dotted the landscape, barns, bunkhouses, corrals filled with horses. It was prosperous and well-maintained, a testament to decades of hard work. Ranch hands stopped their work to watch as the wagon approached. Clara could feel their curious stares, could see them noting the tension between her and Thomas, the way he would not look at her, the way she sat with tears still drying on her face. An older man emerged from the main house as they pulled up, tall despite his years, with white hair and a weathered face that spoke of a lifetime under the prairie sun. This was Mr. Harrison, Clara knew without being told. He carried himself with the authority of a man who had built something from nothing and defended it for 30 years. Thomas. Harrison's voice was gruff but warm. Good to see you back. And you must be... He stopped, his sharp eyes taking in Clara's tear-stained face, Thomas's rigid posture. What's happened? Thomas climbed down from the wagon, helped Clara down with mechanical politeness that was somehow worse than anger. Mr. Harrison, we need to talk. Inside would be best. The old man's eyes narrowed, but he nodded. Come in. Both of you. Clara followed them into the house, her legs shaking. The interior was comfortable but masculine. Heavy furniture, leather and wood, everything practical and well used. Harrison led them into a study lined with books and papers, gesturing for them to sit. Thomas remained standing. So did Clara. All right, Harrison said, lowering himself into a chair behind a large desk. What's this about? Thomas pulled out the 2 letters, placed them on the desk. You need to read these first. Harrison picked them up, read them in silence. Clara watched his face change, surprise, then understanding, then something that might have been relief. When he finished, he set the letters down carefully and looked at Clara. So Josephine Wells ran off with some boy, and Robert married an actress in San Francisco. He shook his head. Can't say I'm entirely surprised. That girl never seemed keen on the arrangement, and Robert does what Robert wants. There's more, Thomas said, his voice tight. This woman is not Josephine Wells. Her name is Clara Wells. She's Josephine's cousin. She's been impersonating her since I picked her up at the train station. Harrison's gaze sharpened on Clara. Is this true? Clara found her voice, though it came out rough. Yes, sir. It's true. I went to the station to explain that Josephine was sick. But when Mr. Clay called me Miss Josephine Wells, I didn't correct him. I let him believe I was her. I've been deceiving him this whole journey. Why would you do such a thing? It was the question she had been asking herself. Why had she done it? At first, I think it was just curiosity. I'm a school teacher with no prospects, no future beyond the classroom. My engagement had just ended because I wasn't good enough, wasn't wealthy enough. And then suddenly, here was this man treating me like I was someone worth something. Someone worth escorting across the prairie. I wanted to feel that just for a little while, and then... Harrison asked, his tone neutral, and then I got to know Mr. Clay. I saw what a good man he was. I started to... Her voice broke. I started to care for him. But by then the lie was too big, too tangled. I didn't know how to undo it. Harrison was quiet for a long moment, studying her. Then he looked at Thomas. And you? What's your part in this? I was a fool. Thomas's voice was harsh. I believed her. Let myself trust her. Let myself... He stopped, unable to finish. Let yourself care for her. Harrison finished. I could see that when you rode up. A blind man could have seen it. It doesn't matter now. She lied about everything, did she? Harrison leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepled. Seems to me she lied about her name and her situation. But everything else, the person you got to know these past days, that was real, wasn't it? Thomas's jaw tightened. You don't understand. I understand better than you think. I'm old, Thomas, not stupid. I've watched you these 3 years, working yourself to exhaustion, keeping everyone at arm's length, refusing to feel anything because feeling means risk. And then this young woman comes along and somehow gets past your walls. And now you're angry, not because she lied, but because she made you vulnerable again. That's not, it is. Harrison's voice was firm. But I'm not here to psychoanalyze my foreman. What I need to know is, what do you want to do now? Before anyone could answer, there was a commotion outside, the sound of a wagon arriving, voices calling greetings. Harrison rose and went to the window. That'll be Robert. Finally decided to come home and face the music. They moved to the porch to watch Robert Harrison climb down from a wagon, then turned to help a woman down beside him. She was beautiful in an unconventional way. Dark hair, bright eyes, a confidence in her bearing that spoke of someone accustomed to stages and audiences. This was Elizabeth, clearly, Robert's actress bride. Robert spotted his grandfather and squared his shoulders, preparing for conflict. But Harrison just walked down the porch steps with his hand extended. So you're married. Congratulations. Robert blinked, clearly thrown. You're not angry. Oh, I'm angry you didn't tell me yourself instead of sending a letter. But angry about the marriage? No. If this is the woman you chose, then bring her inside and let me meet her properly. Robert looked like he might cry with relief. He introduced Elizabeth, who charmed Harrison within 5 minutes with her directness and obvious love for Robert. They all moved back inside, where explanations continued. Robert's letter, his fears, his hope that his grandfather would understand. I do understand, Harrison said gruffly. Better than you think. I married Emma against her father's wishes. He thought I wasn't good enough for her. Took him 10 years to forgive me, but eventually he did. Love's worth fighting for, boy. Worth the risk. His eyes flickered to Thomas and Clara as he said this, the meaning clear. But Thomas did not respond. His face still closed off. Elizabeth, perceptive as actresses need to be, studied Clara with interest. And who is this? The explanations started again. Clara's deception, the reasons, the fallout. To Clara's surprise, Elizabeth did not look shocked or disapproving. Instead, she laughed, a warm, genuine sound. "Oh, I like you," she said to Clara. "You actually did it. Pretended to be someone else to see what it was like. That takes courage. Or stupidity," Thomas muttered. "Sometimes they're the same thing." Elizabeth looked at him with sharp eyes. "You're angry because she lied. But tell me, if she had told you the truth at that train station, would you have brought her along anyway?" "No, of course not. Then you would never have known her. Would never have had these days together. Would never have felt whatever it is you're feeling right now that has you so twisted up inside." Elizabeth shrugged. "Sometimes deception is just another word for courage to claim something you want." "That's not how the world works," Thomas said. "Maybe not your world, but it's worked that way in mine." She turned to Robert. "Your grandfather just said love is worth the risk. I think your foreman needs to decide if he agrees." The room fell silent. Clara could feel everyone's eyes on them. Harrison, Robert, Elizabeth, even the housekeeper who had appeared with refreshments. But she only looked at Thomas, willing him to meet her gaze. He finally did, and the pain in his eyes made her want to weep again. "I can't trust you," he said quietly. "How can I ever trust you?" "I understand," Clara said, her voice steady despite the tears on her cheeks. "I betrayed your trust. I know that. But Thomas, I need you to know, everything I felt, everything we shared, that was real. The only lie was my name. Everything else was me. The real me. How do I know that? You don't. You have to choose to believe it. The same way you chose to trust me at the beginning." She took a shaky breath. "But I won't ask you to. I've asked too much already. Mr. Harrison, if you could arrange transportation back to Millbrook, I'll leave as soon as possible. I'll pay you back for the costs somehow." "Now hold on," Harrison said. "Nobody's arranging anything until we've all had time to think. Clara, you'll stay here tonight. There's a guest room. Thomas, you need to decide what you want. Not what you think you should want, but what you actually want. And everyone else needs to mind their own business." He stood, effectively ending the discussion. "Dinner's at 6. I expect everyone at the table. We'll sort this out like civilized people." Clara was shown to a small but comfortable room on the second floor. She sat on the bed, still clutching her journal, the pressed wildflower falling out onto her lap. She picked it up, this fragile thing that Thomas had given her in a moment of awkward tenderness, and she cried. She had been right about one thing. Confession had brought no relief, only this aching sense of loss, of having held something precious for too brief a time and let it slip through her fingers. Outside her window, she could see Thomas walking away from the house, heading toward the barn. Even from here, she could read the tension in his shoulders, the anger and confusion in every line of his body. She had done that to him, had taken a man who was just beginning to heal and opened his wounds all over again. Whatever happened now, she knew she deserved his anger. She just wished she knew how to make it right. Dinner was a strained affair. The housekeeper, Mrs. Chen, had prepared a feast: roasted chicken, potatoes, fresh bread, vegetables from the ranch garden. It was the kind of meal meant for celebration. But the mood at the table was anything but celebratory. Harrison sat at the head of the table, Robert and Elizabeth on one side, Clara and Thomas on the other, carefully separated by enough space to make the distance between them obvious. Thomas had cleaned up, changed his shirt, but his expression remained closed off. He barely looked at Clara throughout the meal. Robert tried to fill the silence with talk of San Francisco, of business opportunities, of his plans for the ranch. Elizabeth added stories about the theater, making Harrison laugh despite himself. They were working hard to lighten the mood, Clara realized, trying to give her and Thomas space to breathe. Finally, Harrison set down his fork with a deliberate sound. "All right, enough dancing around it. Clara, tell us about yourself. The real you, not the person you were pretending to be." Clara's throat was tight, but she forced herself to speak. "I'm 29. I've been teaching school in Millbrook for 4 years. Before that, I trained at the normal school in Topeka. My mother died when I was 16. My father, he drinks. I've been on my own mostly since then, supporting myself, trying to make a difference in small ways." "What do you teach?" Elizabeth asked, genuine interest in her voice. "Everything. It's a small schoolhouse, 12 students, ages 6 to 14. Reading, writing, arithmetic, history, geography. I try to teach them art too when I can. Drawing, poetry, things that help them see beauty in the world." "You said your engagement ended," Harrison said, not unkindly. "What happened there?" Clara felt heat rise in her face. "His name was Marcus. His father owned the bank. We courted for 2 years, and I thought maybe it would lead to marriage. But his father decided I wasn't suitable. No family money, no connections, just a school teacher. So Marcus ended it." She swallowed hard. "He told me I was fine, but not enough." "His loss," Elizabeth said firmly. "That's what I told myself. But it still hurt. It hurt to feel like no matter what I did, no matter how hard I worked or how much I had to offer, I would never be enough for certain people." Clara's voice grew quieter. "So when Thomas called me Miss Josephine Wells, when he treated me like I was someone worth something, I wanted to feel that. Just for a moment. I wanted to know what it was like to be chosen." Thomas's fork clattered against his plate. Everyone looked at him. His jaw was tight, his eyes fixed on the table. "You were always enough," he said so quietly they almost could not hear. "You didn't need to pretend to be someone else. But if I had told you the truth at the station, would you have seen that?" The question hung in the air. Thomas had no answer. "I think," Harrison said slowly, "that sometimes we all wear masks. Sometimes out of necessity, sometimes out of fear. The question is not whether we wear them, but whether we're willing to take them off when it matters." "She took hers off," Elizabeth pointed out. "Eventually. She told the truth before you reached the ranch, didn't she? She could have kept lying, could have tried to maintain the deception, but she didn't." Thomas finally looked at Clara, really looked at her. "Why did you tell me this morning?" "What changed?" "I found the letters. I realized that Josephine was never coming, that Robert didn't want a bride, that the whole thing I thought I was interfering with didn't exist. I realized I'd been lying for nothing. And I couldn't let you walk into that ranch still believing I was someone I wasn't. You deserved the truth." "Even knowing I'd be angry? Even knowing it might mean losing?" He stopped, unable to finish. "Even then," Clara said softly, "because you're a good man, Thomas. You value honesty, and I realized that if I truly cared about you, I owed you that. even if it cost me everything. The room was silent except for the ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner. Clara saw Thomas's hands clench and unclench, saw the war happening inside him. "I need time," he said finally. "I need to think about all of this." "I understand." Clara stood, her chair scraping against the floor. "Mr. Harrison, thank you for your hospitality. If you could arrange for me to leave in the morning, I would be grateful. I've imposed enough." "Clara," Harrison started, but she shook her head. "It's all right. It's the right thing. I should never have come here." She looked at Thomas one last time, memorizing his face. "For what it's worth, these were the best days of my life, and I'm sorry I ruined them." She left the dining room before anyone could respond, climbed the stairs to the guest room, and closed the door behind her. Through the window, she could see the vast prairie stretching away into darkness, the stars beginning to emerge in the deepening sky. Somewhere out there was the life she had left behind. The small boarding house room, the schoolhouse, the safe, predictable existence that had felt like a prison until she stepped onto that train platform. She had wanted to be chosen, and for 6 days she had been. That would have to be enough. Thomas could not sleep. He lay in his small room in the bunkhouse, staring at the ceiling, his mind replaying every moment of the past 6 days, every conversation, every look. Every time Clara had almost told him the truth, but stopped herself. He was angry. That much was clear. She had lied to him, deceived him, made a fool of him. But beneath the anger was something else, a grief that felt familiar. The same grief he had carried for 3 years since Margaret died. The grief of losing something precious. But Margaret had been taken from him by fate, by tragedy, by circumstances beyond anyone's control. Clara had chosen to deceive him. That was different, wasn't it? He got up, pulled on his pants and shirt, walked out into the night. The prairie was quiet under the stars, the same stars he had shown Clara just days ago. He found himself walking to the barn, to the horses, seeking the comfort of familiar routine. He was brushing down one of the mares when he heard footsteps behind him. He turned to find Harrison standing in the barn doorway, a lantern in his hand. "Figured I'd find you here," the old man said. "You always did work when you couldn't sleep." Thomas turned back to the horse. "I'm fine. You're not fine. You're hurting, and you're confused, and you're trying to decide if it's worth the risk to open your heart again." Harrison moved into the barn, hung the lantern on a hook. "Want some advice from an old man? Do I have a choice?" Harrison chuckled. "Not really. Thomas, you've been working for me 3 years. In that time, I've watched you shut yourself off from everything except your duties. You're a good foreman, maybe the best I've ever had, but you're only half alive." Thomas's hands stilled on the brush. "That's not true." "It is true. You breathe, you work, you eat, you sleep. But you don't live. You don't let yourself feel anything because feeling means risk. Feeling means you might get hurt again." Harrison's voice softened. "I understand that. When Emma died, I wanted to shut down too. Wanted to just focus on the ranch, on work, on anything that didn't remind me I was alone. What changed? Time, and realizing that Emma would be furious with me for wasting the life she couldn't have. She loved life, loved people, loved this ranch, and she would have wanted me to keep loving it too, even without her." Thomas set down the brush, leaned against the stall door. "Margaret was pregnant when she died. Did you know that? I knew, a daughter. We were going to name her Rose." His voice cracked. "I held her. This tiny, perfect thing that never got to take a breath. And then Margaret, the fever took her 3 hours later. I lost them both in the same day." Harrison's hand fell heavy on his shoulder. "I'm sorry, son. No man should have to bear that. I told Clara about it. Told her things I've never told anyone. And the whole time she was lying to me, this was she. Think about it, Thomas. When she listened to you talk about Margaret, when she understood your grief, when she held your trust like something precious, was that a lie? Or was that the realest thing that's happened to you in 3 years?" Thomas closed his eyes. He could see Clara's face when he had talked about Margaret, the genuine compassion in her eyes, the way she had not tried to fix it or minimize it, but simply witnessed his pain. That had been real. He knew it had been real. She lied about her name, Harrison continued, about her circumstances. But from what I saw today, she didn't lie about who she is. That woman in there, the one who teaches children, who draws because she sees beauty, who helped that family on the trail, who chose to tell you the truth even knowing it would cost her, that's who she really is. The rest was just window dressing. How do I trust her again? The same way you trusted her the first time. You choose to. You decide that the risk is worth it. Harrison squeezed his shoulder. Margaret's gone, son. You can't bring her back, and you can't keep her memory alive by refusing to live. What you can do is honor what you had with her by being brave enough to love again. Thomas felt something break open in his chest, a dam that had been holding back 3 years of grief, of anger, of fear. What if I lose her too? Then you'll grieve, and you'll survive just like you did before. But Thomas, what if you don't lose her? What if this is your second chance? Are you really going to let it walk away in the morning because you're too scared to try? Thomas looked at the lantern light, at the shadows it cast, at the horse peacefully eating hay, unconcerned with human complications. He thought about Clara's face when she had confessed, the tears, the resignation, the acceptance that she had ruined everything. But she had not ruined everything. She had shown him he could still feel, still hope, still want something more than just getting through each day. What do I do? He asked quietly. You go tell her the truth, your truth. And then you see if maybe, just maybe, you can build something real out of all this mess. Thomas nodded slowly. He left the barn, walked across the yard to the main house, took the stairs 2 at a time to the 2nd floor. He stood outside Clara's door, his heart pounding, his hand raised to knock. Then he did. 3 soft raps in the darkness, the door opened. Clara stood there in her nightdress, her hair down around her shoulders, her eyes red from crying. She looked at him with such hope and fear that it nearly broke him. I'm still angry, Thomas said, and I don't know how long it will take me to trust you completely again. But Clara, I don't want you to leave. I want you to stay. I want us to try, because these 6 days, even with the lies, were the best days I've had since Margaret died. And I think maybe that means something. Clara's hand went to her mouth, tears spilling over. You mean it? I mean it. If you'll have me, knowing I'm just a foreman with no prospects, knowing I come with ghosts and grief, knowing it won't be easy. She closed the distance between them, took his face in her hands. Yes to all of it, and then she kissed him and Thomas kissed her back, and it felt like coming home and starting over all at the same time. 6 months later, Clara stood in the doorway of the small cabin Thomas had built on the western edge of the Broken Arrow property. Mr. Harrison had given them the land, 5 acres, just enough for a home and a garden, and perhaps someday a few animals of their own. It was a wedding gift, he had said, though the real gift was his blessing. They had married in the spring, a simple ceremony on the ranch with Robert and Elizabeth as witnesses. Harrison giving Clara away like the father she had never really had. She had worn a dress Elizabeth helped her sew, simple but beautiful. And Thomas had worn his best shirt and looked at her like she hung the moon. The cabin was modest, 2 rooms, a stone fireplace, windows that caught the morning light. But it was theirs, built by Thomas's hands, furnished with pieces they had collected together, made into a home by the life they were creating inside it. Clara walked out onto the small porch, coffee cup in hand, and watched the sun rise over the prairie. The land stretched before her, just as it had that first evening in the wagon, golden and endless. But everything had changed. She was no longer pretending to be someone else. She was simply Clara Clay now, wife to a good man, teacher to the children of the ranch families who had begun gathering in the barn twice a week for lessons. She heard Thomas behind her, felt his arms come around her waist, his chin resting on her shoulder. "Morning," he murmured against her ear. "Morning." She leaned back into him, solid and warm and real. "Sleep well?" "Better than I have in years." It was what he said most mornings, and it never failed to make her smile. They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the day begin. 6 months had not erased all the difficulties. There were still moments when Thomas struggled with trust, when the memory of her deception rose up between them. There were still nights when he woke reaching for Margaret, forgetting for a moment that Clara was the one beside him now. And there were times when Clara questioned whether she deserved this happiness, whether she had earned the right to this second chance. But they were learning to be honest when hurt arose, instead of letting it fester, learning to choose each other even when it was hard, learning that love built on truth, even truth that came late, was stronger than love built on pretense. "What are you thinking about?" Thomas asked, his voice soft in the morning quiet. "About choices," Clara said. "About how one decision can change everything. If I had told you the truth that first day at the station, none of this would have happened. Would you want it different?" She turned in his arms to face him. "No, I wouldn't change it. Even the hard parts, even the pain. It brought us here." Thomas cupped her face in his work-roughened hands. "I love you, Clara Clay. Not Josephine Wells, not some wealthy heiress. You, the woman who teaches my students with patience, who draws the world because she sees its beauty, who had the courage to tell me the truth even when it cost her everything." "It didn't cost me everything," she said softly. "It gave me everything." The sound of a wagon approaching drew their attention. Harrison was coming up the track, Robert beside him, Elizabeth waving from the back. They were bringing supplies for the cabin. Furniture Robert had commissioned in town, fabric Elizabeth had selected for curtains. They had become family in ways that still surprised Clara. Not the family she had been born into, but the family she had chosen and been chosen by. As they helped unload the wagon, as Elizabeth teased her about the baby they all suspected she was carrying, though Clara had not yet confirmed it. As Robert discussed plans for expanding the ranch school, as Harrison sat on the porch and watched them all with satisfaction, Clara felt a fullness in her chest that was almost painful. She had come to that train station 6 months ago, looking for something she could not name. A sense of being valued, of being chosen, of mattering to someone. She had thought she needed to be someone else to find that. Someone wealthier, prettier, more polished, but what she had learned was simpler and more profound. She had needed to be brave enough to be herself, to risk rejection by showing up as Clara, not as some idealized version of who she thought others wanted her to be. And in doing that, in finally telling Thomas the truth, she had found what she was looking for. That evening, after their guests had gone and the cabin was quiet again, Clara sat by the fire with her journal. She turned to the page where the pressed wildflower still lay, brown and fragile now, but still precious. Beside it, she had pressed a flower from her wedding bouquet, a prairie rose, pink and perfect. She began to write, "Sometimes a single choice made out of kindness can change 2 lives forever." But what I did not know then, standing on that dusty train platform, was that the real courage is not in pretending to be someone else. The real courage is in being yourself, in telling the truth even when it is hard, in choosing to be seen for who you truly are. Thomas came to sit beside her, looked over her shoulder at what she had written. "Thinking about writing a book someday? Maybe. About a woman who got on a wagon by mistake and found her home." "I like that story," Thomas said, pulling her close. "Especially the ending." Clara closed her journal and rested her head on his shoulder. Through the window, she could see the stars beginning to emerge, the same stars that had watched over their journey together. The prairie stretched away into darkness, vast and beautiful and full of possibility. She had been looking for someone to choose her. But in the end, the most important choice had been her own. To choose honesty over pretense. To choose love even when it was risky. To choose a life built on truth rather than one built on lies. And somehow, miraculously, she had been chosen back. In the distance, a coyote called to the night. Thomas's arms tightened around her. And Clara thought about the woman she had been 6 months ago. Heartbroken, lonely, desperate to be seen. That woman had made a foolish choice on a train platform. But that foolish choice had led her here, to this cabin, to this man, to this life. Sometimes, she thought, the best things begin with mistakes. As long as we have the courage to make them right.